Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In our last few lectures, we have been looking at the notion of stylistics as a domain, as a subject, as a discipline, as a form of literary criticism and understanding of literary writings. The previous 10 lectures were devoted to the fact that how we look at the origin of stylistics, its development, and also what does it owe to literary criticism as well as to linguistics, because linguistics has developed as a field in the 20th century and literary criticism has been there even in the classical ancient Greek times. Now that the classical criticism meets the linguistic theories and discoveries, it has to reinvigorate the study of literary writings too. So the way of looking at literary texts has to change. It has to undergo certain innovations, which the discipline of stylistics has introduced for the help of the literary critics as well as for linguists, and now a new field of analysis of literary styles and literary writings has emerged, which claims that scientific and objective analysis can only be possible if we look at the style of the text as separate from its theme and its content. When the literary stylisticians work with the linguistic stylisticians, they form a very comprehensive way of looking at a text from the perspective of a linguist as well as from the perspective of a literary critic. Now, this makes us aware of the fact that how in contemporary times the nature of discourse, the nature of writing and the expression has become quite a focus of literary critics. And now literary critics must be equipped with the knowledge of the language that the study of linguistics grants to them. And with that knowledge of the linguistics, they are supposed to make very accurate, scientific and vigorous analysis of the literary writings. And for this particular reason, the critics in the field of formalism and structuralism have devised certain theories, and from among those theories there are certain concepts like foregrounding and deviation which have been investigated and discovered by the formalists. And these discoveries and innovations brought about in the field of stylistics and the discipline of literary criticism and linguistics by the formalists have become a focal point of discussion in the understanding of literature and poetry in contemporary times. Because as all the critics from I.A. Richards to Makarowski and even Widdowson are agreed upon this point that the literary language is different from ordinary language. And they are interested to find out what are the elements which distinguish or differentiate the literary language from the ordinary language. And if the purpose of art is to provide a relief, is to provide pleasure to the audience, then it is not directed like news or articles to convey information primarily. When the primary purpose of art or literature is to convey a sense of feeling or a pleasure, or it has to evoke a sensation in the readers, then it must operate on certain principles and it must rely on certain elements which are worth investigation and which really deserve a very focused attention to those elements. So from today we will get to know the concepts popular in stylistic studies. What are the terms that the stylisticians or linguists or formalists have invented, which they define to be the focal and major part of literary writing, especially poetry. Now, we will study one of those concepts which are very vital to the study of stylistics, because up till now we have been looking at the development of stylistics, the emergence of stylistics as a field, and what does it owe to literary criticism and linguistics for its development and for its popularity and its need in the contemporary time for the study of literary writings. Now, when we say that we have to interpret, analyze, and give meaning to the text, which are unusual, different, and striking and strange, then what are those strange features labeled as becomes a focal point. The basic question that a stylistician or a student like you would ask on reading the poems or literary writings is that we agree on this point that the literary language or poetic language is different from ordinary language. But what is it that makes it different? There must be some term that has to define those features. And one of such terms that we will be introduced to today is called foregrounding. Foregrounding, as the very title suggests, is bringing something to the front or the foreground. The word has in it the very word foreground. So foreground is something that is set against a background. So for something to be apparent or visible on the foreground, there has to be a background as well. So we'll look at the concept of foregrounding in literature, or specifically in poetry, with reference to what this concept is, how it developed, where has it been borrowed from, and what are various examples of foregrounding in literature. According to Czech theorist Jan Makarowski, who is also very much popular for his theories that he developed for the study of formalism and the theory of formalism, that is also referred to as a school of thought for the study of language. He states that this term is borrowed by stylisticians from art, specifically art criticism. Because if you talk about art, you imagine paintings, you imagine portraits, landscapes or portraits, any form that is making use of a medium, either watercolors, oil paints, or pencils. Now look at art as it is also an expression, and to create an impression of a thing that the artist has seen, he uses a medium. Now the theme or idea is expressed through the medium that would be either colors, paints, or pencils, or black and white, description. That would become his medium. Now if art is making use of the objects which a painter paints, he may paint numerous things, but in his painting he would like to focus on one particular thing that he wants to bring to the foreground. When something is presented as striking, unusual, and standing out as distinct and different from other things, it would strike us as it would be presented in a background. So the concept of foregrounding in literature comes from art criticism, where the critics distinguish between the foreground and the background in a painting. And the purpose of art, as we realize, is to impart the sensation or feeling that has been perceived by an artist on seeing something. That is not a photographic reality. For example, if you observe a scene outside, it gives you a picture of maybe a rainbow in the sky, the clouds and the sun, and maybe the moon, whatever the things you notice in the sky. It would be something that would leave a mark or impression in your mind. Either it is the scene of sunset, or it is the scene of watching a rainbow, or it is a scene of looking at the sunshine. Now that would remain in your mind as a picture, and as an artist you would paint it. For example, an artist would paint a picture of the sky the way he looks at it, with different colors, hues and shades. Either it would be having shades of gray, blue, or even pink, or certain colors like purple or mauve, or even he can give it an idea of a very bright or orange sort of color which the sunshine would be depicting towards it. Now it will reveal that the artist has considered something that should strike the viewer, or the one who perceives art or observes art, as distinct and unusual and strange and striking in the foreground. For example, the sky would fade into the background, and the rainbow or the sun or the moon, that would appear in the foreground. So if in a painting, for example, the sky serves as the background with little bits of clouds, then either the rainbow or the sun or the moon would appear, for example, very obvious, very striking, very much, worth paying attention to the audience or the viewer. Similarly, just like a painting, writing, literary writing also makes use of this feature, that within a text or a poem, the writer would make use of multiple words, but a few of them would become foregrounded. So, rest of the language in a poem would recede to the background, and a few striking features would appear in the front as foregrounded features. So this is, in very simple terms, foregrounding in literature, which has been borrowed from art criticism. We know that literary writing and expression of poetry is also a form of art, and it is a general principle of artistic communication that the work of art must deviate, it must violate the norms, the rules, the principles set for description or expression. If an art follows something quite, strictly, it loses its charm. Isn't it same the case with, for example, anything that we are used to of watching, that we get bored with it? For example, if the movies are made on same topics and the same actors or the same storylines are repeated, we don't really get attracted to those movies. We want change. Similarly, designs or fashion in dresses, if it is also repeated time and again, we get bored. We want something new to wear, to see, or to experience. Same is the case with human experience as the art or expression in art is concerned. Artistic expression either in painting or artistic expression in writing. This also needs from the writers and experts experimentation. They must not follow the same trodden path. They must not follow the same principles, laws that have been used from centuries. If writers bring about changes, innovations in their address, in their writing, in their speech, that would be something striking to the readers. It would keep the interest alive. It would make the work stay alive. It will not be lost in oblivion. It will be ranked because it has contributed something new to writing. So this urge for creating something new, different, unusual, and the urge to catch the attention of the reader, to make him feel interested in reading, is what is the motivation behind the technique that we refer to as foregrounding. We also refer to foregrounding as a theory because it has been proposed by the formalists. So formalists say that it's a theory that poses that art always tries to innovate, invent, and make things appear different. So it is said that art always deviates from the norms which we as members of society have become habitual to. So if we are used to of seeing things in a particular way, when we see something unusual and different, that would become striking. So same is the case with painting and writing. So when the painters diverted to the expression that is, for example, the expression in abstract painting. Now when the abstract paintings became popular, they were a change, a deviation, and a very striking feature for the art lovers, because the writers, just like the writers, the painters were deviating or they were violating the norms, the rules. So the paintings which earlier have been depicting the picture of reality, which have been painting the picture of reality as it is seen by the eye, when it was distorted, changed by the artists in painting, it was received as something that is deviant, unusual, and worth paying attention to. So when a writer deviates or brings about a change in the way of writing through many features that we will notice today in the poems, he is also making it a foregrounded reality in his text. So he is using foregrounding as a feature to attract the audience or to show that art has to stay alive through its experimentation with the language and the writing styles. when we say that a painting does not simply reproduce the visual realities. A painting captures the sensation of reality. If you observe a street, you would find certain other things that would catch your attention. But if a same street has been painted by a painter, he would have given importance to certain particular aspects which he had observed in the same street, which you look through your naked eye. But the sensation presented to you through the painting would be different than when you would look at the street through your naked eye. So it seems that the purpose of art is to convey a sensation, and it deviates from the photographic reality. So photographic accuracy is what your eye or your camera can perceive. The artistic reality or sensation is what a paint or a brush would capture or paint. Similarly, it is seen in writing as well. When we talk about literary writing, writers also operate on the same principles on which the painters operate or work. If a painter's job is to present the sensation or the feeling of an object the way he observes it, rather than to present the photographic reality or the way we on perceiving it directly through our eye would see it, he is doing the same thing which an artist, a literary artist would be doing by presenting the same thing through words, by either deviating the norms or by presenting something as a foregrounded reality. So art simply is not the copy of nature. Similarly, literature also is not the imitation or the copy of real life. It is something that creates the sense, feeling that is filled with, you can say, either fantasy or desires or feelings or the particular interest or touch that is felt by a writer and conveyed through the reader with the help of words. And abstract painting also is interesting because that painting deviates from the norms of measured regular patterns that are seen through either the eye or through the eye of the camera. So when the absolute symmetry or order is broken and a painter blurs the very picture of reality, that is a deviation in art. Just the way we looked at it from the example of Impressionism, where a painter would paint a picture in a feeling that is giving a sense of something that is hazy, blurred, or is covered with mist. It may not be as striking, as bright as the real world would be, but the impressionistic painting would deviate from the reality because it is creating the impression of the things as seen by the artist. Similarly, an abstract painting might be inspired by something in reality encountered by the painter, but the sensation is something that is covered, hidden within the abstract images that have been created. The cubes, the circles might be referring to the objects that are geometrical, equations or objects, but they might be referring to people. So it is deviation, that instead of forming a human being the way it appears, the painter has perceived and conceived it in the form of either cubes or circles. Now that is deviation. You don't find human beings in that shape. So to understand the concept of foregrounding in literature, it is important that you understand that how the same concept has been borrowed from art and painting, because art and painting operates on this principle that the purpose of art is not to present the photographic reality or things accurately as they are seen. That we are doing with the naked eye or the eye of camera. But where does the artistry of a painter lie? That how can he present a sensation of similarity of thing, and how can he see in something that is an object something unusual? That is also possible in literary writing. What an artist does to paint a reality, that he conveys its impression, that he conveys its sensation, and that he molds it, changes it according to his own perception, the way he sees it. Now, in literary writing and in poetry specifically, painters, the way the painters paint painting, the writers also paint a picture of something that looks like real, but as if we haven't ever seen it before. Observe these two pictures to understand the concept of foregrounding, and that would help us in understanding what foregrounding in literature is like. For example, in the picture where you can see the bridge, look at this impressionistic painting by an impressionistic artist, Claude Monet, depicts a sensation of seeing a kind of lake that has got a bridge over it. Now, this is not the picture that you would encounter in reality, but the way it is presented as blurred, hazy, how colors seem to be getting diffused with each other, and how it appears to be conveying a sensation of the reality. That is what it is, that is how it is deviating. And observing this picture, if you want to see what becomes foreground, what becomes background, it's your own perception. For example, very obviously in this picture, you can see that the bridge catches our attention. It becomes an object that is foregrounded, that is made deliberately to appear into the front. And rest of the green parts in the picture, either the flowers or the greenery or the leaves, they recede to the background. So something is painted where background is not the canvas, rather background is again some other objects. In another picture also, you observe that this is the impressionistic painting of the scene of night, a nighttime scene that is reflected in the water. There are many objects painted by the painter, but it depends upon the viewer what object catches his or her attention. For example, in this picture, the moon catches our attention. As when we look at the moon, rest of the objects and colors recede into the background, and we see moon to be prominent. And the moon painted by the painter is not the same moon that you see in the sky. He has given it a color, a little yellowish. He has given it a blur or hazy look as well. You feel that it's a sensation that is conveyed. It is not the photographic accurate picture of the scene at the night time near the river or water. So if this is what art captures, is conceived to be the same what the artist or literary artist captures. Literary artist also wants to convey a sense or a feeling of the same things that we come across daily. For example, looking at these paintings, you see that you might have come across many such scenes where you have seen a bridge over a lake or many flowers or trees, but this scene appeals to you as the angle from which the painter has painted it is different. Similarly, the way in the next picture the moon has been conceived or painted by the artist, that appeals to you that never before would you consider that this could be the beauty of the time of the night when the moon would be reflected into the water too. So that is what a literary artist also does. That is what a poet also does. He would also paint a picture with the help of words. And when a literary artist paints a picture with the help of words, he also puts certain features in the foreground or the forefront and keeps the rest of the features in the background. So for the literary artist, the instrument or the medium is the language, not colors like the painter. Now, if the literary artist has got his medium in the form of words, now he has to play with words, putting some words in the foreground and some in the background. But how is it done? Because writing is not a visual stimuli like painting. Writing is something that has to be it has to be going through comprehension or cognition of the reader. So if a reader is to comprehend or understand these words rather than just to see and read, it means that the meaning of the words would be of importance to bring them to the foreground. So foregrounding for the sake of conveying a feeling of unusualness and strangeness depends upon the use of words, use of devices that are employed by the artists and the literary writers in their writings, especially poetry. When we talk about foregrounding in literature, we say that the concept has been borrowed by the writers from the art criticism. We looked at art criticism for the sake of understanding that what were the similarities between literary writings and paintings that have made the literary artists or literary critics to borrow the term foregrounding from art. Now we look at literary foregrounding in detail. That foregrounding in literature refers to a range of stylistic effects that occur in literature. Now, range of stylistic effects, it's not a new term for you, as we have looked at the stylistic devices in our previous lectures as well, either in the study of literary stylistics or linguistic stylistics. It's phonological patterning, it's grammatical structure, it's semantic structure that makes up these stylistic effects. It can also encompass literary devices, figurative language, anything that is literary in terms of expression, writing and speech is what we refer to as stylistic effects. Now these effects can be, for example, on phonetic level, maybe in the with the help of alliteration and rhyme. The writer might foreground some words. Also, the writer may also foreground the grammatical features. For example, features like inversion and ellipses. Similarly, another way a writer can foreground some words in the text or a poem, it could be semantic level, at the level of the meaning of a word in the form of metaphor, irony, pun. So all these features which may occur at phonetic, grammatical, semantic, morphological or phonological level, or even they may occur at the appearance of the text or the graphological level, and even literary devices. They all are the tools that a writer employs in his writing for the sake of achieving the effect of foregrounding. And then the rest of the language of the text recedes into the background, because something becomes striking only when it is pushed forward because of its novel use, because of its strange, unusual use, and how it fits as something odd, unusual, into something that is ordinary and regular. So against the pattern of regularity, something irregular, striking, strange, and unusual is presented. That is referred to as foregrounding in literature. Now, what are the purposes of foregrounding? Why do the writers use foregrounding? Why the formalists and the linguists and literary statisticians give importance to the term of foregrounding? There are many reasons for foregrounding, that it helps a writer in achieving the artistic perfection in writing. Because foregrounding allows literature to present meaning with intricacy, which ordinary language does not allow. So something that a writer cannot say openly or explicitly can be done with the help of foregrounding when he employs some devices in his writing. So it makes the expression intricate, delicate, unusual, and very interesting as well. And then the immediate effect of foregrounding is to make objects strange, to achieve defamiliarization. Now this is a very important point, that a writer deliberately wants the reader to encounter something as if that thing has never been read, seen, or felt before by the reader. Because every writer wants to deviate from the norms, violate the norms of writing, so that his writing becomes new, different, and interesting for the readers. So the immediate effect of foregrounding is to make objects strange. This is something very simple if you understand it with the help of a few examples. Look, for example, at the example that we have also discussed in a few previous lectures, that is the celebrated example of John Donne's poem, Valediction Forbidding Mourning, where he uses the conceit of a compass. Now that has become a very important and renowned feature of foregrounding too. We say that Donne's conceit of a compass that he has used for defining the two lovers has been a feature that is referred to as a foregrounding or foregrounded feature. Why this feature of a compass that has been used for the comparison of the lovers has become a foregrounded feature? Because we feel that that analogy or conceit is unusual, strange and different. Never before any writer has imagined a similarity between the lovers and the romantic relationship with an object that is too scientific, or a geometrical object like a compass. That makes it quite unromantic. The poets might like to compare things either with the stream, air, or you can say moonlight or moon, but never two lovers would have been compared with a compass. And the circle of a compass that becomes the sphere of life, the movement of a person in life, in the world, in the globe, that how a man completes his journey and comes back to the point where he started it. So in the beginning, he comes to meet the end as well. So these ideas are unusual because a writer has defamiliarized, a writer has made something appear strange and unusual to the readers. The concept of love, devotion that has been conveyed by the poets in their poems where they talk about love isn't new. The theme is the same, but its presentation is different. And that presentation is different because of the use of the element of foregrounding. So if the conceit becomes a foregrounded feature, it becomes the very point of attraction for the reader, and it defamiliarizes, it makes things strange. Defamiliarization means making something unfamiliar, as if we never knew it before. So when a reader has this sensation or a feeling on reading something that we did not take things in this way, we never thought that this could have been possible, we never thought that this explanation could also be true about love when it could be compared with the compass. So we say that foregrounding may occur in everyday language as well. It's not just confined to literary writing, only to art, poetry. Though we will study more the examples from poetry to understand the concept of foregrounding, also certain other concepts which are related to foregrounding. But just for your general information, I just want to tell you that you can even notice foregrounding in things or discourses elsewhere apart from literary writing too. For example, in journalistic writing or prose, it may occur at random. Even in the nursery rhymes, slogans, or even the advertisements, or even the political speeches, you come across foregrounding, though randomly. But literature makes a very consistent and deliberate use of foregrounding. So foregrounding may occur in everyday language, everyday speech or spoken discourse, and it may occur even in prose. But the most striking use of foregrounding is done in poetry. Foregrounding is also used in novel, plays, prose, fiction or stories, but there it occurs, you can say, not so regularly. But poetry is such a medium or a genre of literature where foregrounding appears to be a very consistent feature which writers deliberately and painstakingly make use of. In literary texts, foregrounding is structured, it is systematic, and it is hierarchical. Now here the description states that foregrounding is done deliberately, thoughtfully, and with a particular system or a design. It has to be structured, it isn't random. Now, when we say that it is systematic, it is structured, it is planned, and it can be even hierarchical. Hierarchical means that it would, be built up gradually, just like the ladder or the stairs. Now, when we say it is systematic, hierarchical, or it is structured, we mean to say that in the writings, writers may make use of a certain set of metaphors, certain related imagery that would build upon, what has been said earlier or used earlier. For example, if a writer in a poem makes use of imagery of vegetation. Now, if he's talking about a particular flower, certain set of images, metaphors, would also relate to the same imagery. For example, if a writer is referring to his experience in, for example, reference to the beloved in the form of a red rose. Now, the related set of metaphors would also be building up to create that image of a rose as a foregrounded feature, which he has presented as the representation of his love or beloved. Then, reference to certain other things from the vegetation would also be there. So the imagery of the same kind would be used by writer. So in this way we say that if patterns of assonance or sounds, related group of metaphors or metaphors in which may be devices of comparison may be used within a single poem to strengthen the idea that the foregrounding is hierarchical and regular feature of a poem. And the imagery might be from a particular domain. For example, disease imagery, nautical imagery, or the nature imagery. So all these patterns which become foregrounded features would be systematic, ordered, hierarchical, and structured. So these concepts will be clear to you when we will be observing the poems as examples. So at this point, it is important that you understand the concepts definition. What do they mean? As far as the application is concerned or locating these concepts in texts and poems is concerned, that we will be doing later, which you will gradually with the passage of time during the course will get familiar with. Because all our exercise of understanding the concepts of stylistics has been done for the sake of applying it on texts. So that would be the last section of our course, where we'll be applying our knowledge, our understanding of all the concepts that we have learned. So practically, when we will analyze the texts, we will locate these things in the text. We will locate these features in poems, prose, and passages of fiction too. So, foregrounding theory, as it has been proposed by the formalists, is related to such qualities as creating the element of surprise and importance. Now, when we say that surprise and importance is what is connected to foregrounded features. Observe the same example of a compass. Aren't we surprised to see that how come Donne, when he's writing a love poem, compares himself and his beloved to two legs of a compass? Why didn't he use the same metaphor of maybe star and moon, or sun and sunshine? That appears quite acceptable or believable. But here it is surprising that how can love be compared to a geometrical object? And it also shows that writer has given importance to something, because when a writer believes to convey something as important, unusual, and worth notice, he would foreground that feature. So a writer is aware of the fact that when something unusual will be presented to the reader, he will stop, observe, think, and be perplexed. So the purpose is to prolong the intensity of feeling and understanding and even an interpretation. Apart from striking the reader with surprise and making him feel that there is importance of this object which has been foregrounded as a feature, some few other reasons are also associated with foregrounding, and one of those is refreshing and changing the reader's mental representations. When we say that a writer wants to refresh and change the way we perceive things, because the way we perceive things has become a regular pattern. The way a writer wants us to look at it now would be refreshing. Just the way we see the picture or a painting of a bridge painted in front of the background of the greenery, water, and the flowers. That was refreshing. We may have come across certain scenes like that, where bridge is extending over the water or the flowers or a beautiful scenic place. But this painting becomes refreshing for the feeling that it has captured particular colors and even shape which we might find as striking and even worth appreciating. So the purpose of foregrounding is to refresh our sensation or understanding of the things, and even to change the way we believe in things. For example, the conceit of compass changes our belief that not just very banal, ordinary objects could be an apt metaphor to describe the relationship of love, but something unusual, strange, or different can also serve the same purpose. And how aptly Donne has made use of that conceit of a compass to describe the idea of love, understanding, and even the faithfulness of the two lovers by describing the fact that the circle that a compass makes is what the two lovers are like, that if one goes away and the other stays at the same point like a compass, leg of a compass, the one who's going would come back to complete that circle towards the first point from where it started. So it's refreshing and it changes the reader's beliefs and mental representations. And foregrounding also describes the fact that there are certain defamiliarizing strategies, and readers must make use of these strategies in order to understand the text. Now, defamiliarizing strategies are the same. If as a term it seems different to you, I already have described that defamiliarization means making things strange. A writer is making the usual or known thing appear strange and unusual as if we have encountered it for the first time. So that is the defamiliarization which foregrounding serves for. Because when you present the idea in an unusual way or a strange way, the reader feels that he has never encountered it before. He will have a little difficulty in understanding it. So hence, it is a strange thing that a reader has encountered, and that is achieved by the writer through foregrounding or making things strange or unfamiliar. When we come across foregrounding in literature or in poetry, as a reader, we feel that we are being challenged by certain notions or devices which we have to focus on, whose meaning we have to interpret, and whose relationship we have to find out with the overall scheme and design of the text. So, foregrounding provides readers with striking passages and even experiences of defamiliarization, and it arouses the feeling that the readers work towards retrieving experience. Now, the idea of foregrounding is related to defamiliarization as well. Because when a writer deviates from the norms or breaks the rules, he presents things, objects, and ideas or symbols which the reader feels he has never seen before or he did not know the meaning of. So when a reader feels that he does not really know what's the connection of this object which appears unfamiliar and strange in a text, like a simile or a metaphor or a symbol, the reader would focus on finding meaning of those things. So the experience is of defamiliarization. For example, a symbol is something that defamiliarizes, that makes us feel that we have encountered something strange, new, and unusual, something that we haven't seen earlier. So when we look at it, we would focus on its differences, and then within that we would try to locate how it has been used by the writer, what purpose does it serve, what relationship does it have with its theme, its form, and overall pattern of the text. So we say that foregrounding provides readers the refreshing sensation, the same sensation that can be experienced by looking at the objects which we encounter in the world. When we look at these things in literature, we are fascinated. So literature doesn't really provide us the accurate reality or the knowledge about the world as the things are, but it makes us ponder or reflect over the things which make us feel as if this is the imitation of reality. This is the representation of reality that is more fascinating than the reality. So when something is to be made more fascinating than actually it is, then it has to make use of defamiliarization, or it has to make use of features like foregrounding. In literature, we have often talked about this fact that the act of communication is secondary. The writer's purpose is not to convey information. His purpose is to give pleasure. You read a poem, you read a novel in order to be, in a different realm. You want to have an experience that is wonderful, strange, unusual, and really pleasing. So when this is the purpose, you don't want to know what is happening around you when you read a novel or a poem. For that purpose, you watch news or you read newspaper. But when you want to be relaxed, when you want to derive aesthetic pleasure, you read a poem or a novel. So that shows to us that the act of communication becomes secondary when it comes to understanding literature or writing literature. The primary focus of the writer is on style when he writes, and the primary focus of a reader should also be on style when he reads. So it is the style that really pleases us. It is the way a thing is said or conveyed in writing or a poem that pleases us. It is the form that makes the expression beautiful. The idea of love, beauty, loneliness, the idea of life and death, they are what we know about in general life, in the real world. But why are we tempted to read the same things about love, despair, loneliness, death, transience in poetry? It strikes us that how each writer looks at the same notions differently, presents them with certain different unusual words, vocabulary, techniques, imagery in a very intricate manner. So when that is done with the help of foregrounding, that is where lies the difference between the reality and literature, because reality is perceived through direct references or direct language, whereas literature is conveyed with the use of indirect, subtle, and intricate language. In poetic language, foregrounding achieves maximum intensity and to the extent of pushing communication to the background, and the object of expression is used for its own sake. Now, this has been said by Jeffrey Leach in his book Linguistic Guide to English Poetry. Jeffrey Leach in his book Linguistic Guide to English Poetry takes up the notion of foregrounding and studies it or explains it with the help of examples from poetry. And he says that foregrounding is used in poetry for the sake of pushing the act of communication to the background. That writer's purpose is not to tell what happened. His purpose is not to narrate a story, but his purpose is to create a story or idea with the help of intricate, delicate, subtle features, which become the foregrounded features in a text. It may be done through the use of devices, either imagery, metaphors, personifications, or even symbols. So when these features are employed tactfully and artistically, they prolong the pleasure, they prolong the duration of our reception of the text, our perception of the text, and our absorption of the text's meaning. So there lies the very beauty of foregrounding, that it does not let you understand things in one go or in a very quick reading. Foregrounding makes you to stop, think, reflect, and then interpret the meaning of those features, which might be symbols, for example, or might be metaphors. So Jeffrey Leach places deviation in a wider context, and he connects it with the general principle of foregrounding. So Jeffrey Leach believes that foregrounding is a feature of literary writing, especially it is the most dominant feature in poetry, and foregrounding is connected with deviation. Deviation is breaking the rules, deviating from the norm, and breaking the regular pattern of utterances and speeches and devising a new or strange way of expression. That is what poetry does. And foregrounding is achieved through deviating. When you want to bring something to the forefront, that is foregrounding. And when it is done by deviating from the norms, violating the norms, it is deviation. So these concepts are what we will repeatedly be talking about in the next lecture also. So if you find difficulty in understanding what deviation and foregrounding are, what's their relationship, so it will be made clear in the coming few lectures as well, and in today's lecture too, you will understand that how the concept of foregrounding is related to the concept of deviation as well. Now, I was telling you that foregrounding is bringing something to the front, making it striking. And deviation is when you break the rules. So deviation is more specific, foregrounding is more broader. So deviation comes under the umbrella term of foregrounding. A writer can foreground something by making a rule, breaking a rule. But deviation would be breaking a rule or disturbing the normal pattern of writing or even utterance. As a general rule, we say that anyone who wishes to investigate the significance of a work of art or the value of the poetic art, he must concentrate as a critic on the elements which are deviant, on the elements which are striking. And these elements produce a feeling of surprise as well as interest for the reader in the writing. So another important thing that we have learned is that foregrounding is done for the sake of achieving this particular purpose, that is, to evoke readers' interest in writing and to evoke the feeling of surprise in the reader. The reader should get impressed, he should be amazed and surprised by encountering a feature like foregrounding, and it may be a deviation as well when he breaks a rule. For example, look at this example that we discussed earlier also, when a writer says, something there is that does not love a wall. This example from Robert Frost's poem, Robert Frost's poem, this example from Robert Frost's poem states that the regular pattern of the syntax is broken. He says, something there is that does not love a wall. Now we as a reader are surprised and our interest is developed to know why is the word something placed in the beginning rather than at its regular place where it should have been. There is something that does not love a wall. Why didn't writer say that? Why did he say something there is? Now putting something in the very beginning of the statement by deviating from the syntactical order, writer is foregrounding. He has foregrounded the word something, brought it to the light, brought it to the focus, where we feel that something has importance. Because the whole poem talks about this idea that there is something which the persona within the poem cannot find out or locate. What is it that breaks the wall? As the poem's title is Mending Walls, and the two neighbors mend the wall each spring because it is broken. They do not know whether it is wind or it is the work of rabbits or it is the work of hunters or dogs that breaks the wall. So he says something there is. Had he said there is something, the word something wouldn't have been highlighted. So that something makes us feel that some supernatural creature or some other force lies there besides the human beings or the animals that may also be responsible for breaking the wall. And we discover it later that nature is against barriers. Nature is against creating walls. So when the poet wanted to give this idea or the theme to the reader that there is something besides human beings and animals and other forces that could be seen with the eye that breaks the wall, he wants to say that it is nature. So here we know that why the word something has been foregrounded and why the syntactical order had been deviated. So this little example of a syntactical deviation shows the example of foregrounding as well, and it shows what foregrounding can achieve by a deviation from a norm or regular pattern, and then how it can also be related to the theme of the poem and the overall pattern, or even the message that the poem wishes to convey to the reader. The application of the concept of foregrounding is most suitable to poetry. We see that in poetry examples of deviation abound, examples of foregrounding abound, and the foregrounded figures or features appear as the linguistic deviation, and then there is another segment of language that becomes its background. So look at this same example of something there is that does not love a wall. Here we also see that from among many words, the word something strikes us. That becomes a foregrounded feature or reality, and rest of the words, there is a wall that, all that pattern recedes into the background. So in a poem, certain words are used to make the background of a poem, and then from among those words, some are highlighted as a feature. Either it might be deviation, it might be a metaphor, it might be a simile or a symbol, which would strike the reader as strange, unusual, different, and irregular, because it would be done for the sake of creating the feeling of surprise and the feeling of interest for the reader. The reader should not just overlook those details. That is what the writer wants. He wants the reader to stop and think and then gain pleasure in the unfolding of the meaning of those deviations and foregrounded irregular features in a text. Victor Shklovsky, another proponent of the formalistic school, has also been impressed by the idea of foregrounding in poetry. He has also studied poetry for the sake of understanding how different it is from the ordinary writing. He states that the purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived, not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult, to increase the length of perception, and this length of perception is the aesthetic end in itself, and it must be prolonged. So here Victor Shklovsky is defending the importance of foregrounding in art. He says that poetry is art, a form of art, and the purpose of art is to prolong the feeling of pleasure, aesthetic pleasure and sensation of understanding of the meaning for the reader. So the artist or a writer can prolong the sensation or the feeling of pleasure when he invests the writing with deviant or foregrounded features. He says that it is aesthetic end in itself. The purpose of a writer is not to impart knowledge, but to give pleasure to the reader, and the pleasure is to be achieved through a particular style that the writer would adopt, and within the style he may foreground some features, he may deviate from the norms, he may defamiliarize what we are familiar with. So when the familiar things are presented in strange, unusual way, there is where the beauty of the poetry or literary writing lies. The function of art is to renew our awareness of the things that have become habitual, known, or ordinary objects around us. So, in everyday experience of life, we begin to take things for granted. But when the same things are presented in a different way, in a new light, in a new perception, then our understanding of these things is refreshed. Our understanding of the importance of these things is enhanced. So for Victor Shklovsky, the devices which the poets employ in their writing, these are not merely ornamental devices. They're not here for the sake of holding the poem within a particular structure. They're not structural or stylistic devices which make a form. He means to say that it's not just the clothing within the clothing there is a substance, there is a personality. So the words are just the clothes. The substance or the theme is to be reached to if you observe what the clothing is like, what the words are like, and the words would abound in the form of foregrounding and deviation in poetry. So he says that in poetry, foregrounding serves this purpose, that it makes things which we know as ordinary things unusual. So the writers talk about those things which we know. They do not talk about things which we may not have known, but the way they talk about it with the help of deviation and foregrounding makes it as if we are encountering it for the first time. We are looking at it for the first time because our perception and experience is renewed. That is how the foregrounding or the concept of foregrounding operates. That is why we love reading literature. That is why we enjoy reading poems or reading novels, because it is the features of a text, the way a writer writes, that makes us understand that he might be talking about the same themes that we have seen or observe in the life, but the way he would talk about it with the help of features, stylistic devices, foregrounded features or deviations, that would be the interesting thing which would surprise us, which would keep us glued to the reading, and which would enhance our understanding of the literary writing as an art. And it would renew our perception as well. It would give us aesthetic pleasure too. Now, look at this chart. This would make things easier for you. It would not let you get confused. What are the relationships between the idea of foregrounding and deviation? And I also made use of the word defamiliarization. So if you as a layman or a person who is just new to these terms is getting confused, this chart would resolve your confusion. I have placed the word foregrounding up there on top. It means that it's an umbrella term, a bigger term which encompasses within it all the concepts that are lying below it. Foregrounding can be achieved either through automatization or defamiliarization. Defamiliarization is also called deviation, and deviation is done through use of tropes. I repeat the same, that foregrounding as an umbrella term encompasses within it the idea of defamiliarization, that is making things appear unfamiliar. So there is no difference between deviation and defamiliarization. They are the same. Either you call it deviation or defamiliarization. And the opposite of the both is automatization and parallelism. Deviation is breaking rule, automatization is making rule. Deviation is called defamiliarization and parallelism is called automatization. These are the concepts that we would be learning in the coming few days. And what is the connection of deviation with the next topic, that is tropes? Tropes would be devices. Which devices are used to break the rule? We will also see which devices are used to make a rule or a scheme. So, foregrounding can be done either by breaking a rule, that is defamiliarization or deviation. And foregrounding can also be done by making a rule, that is automatization or parallelism. Now these are the concepts that are coming up next for our study and our focus. So today we looked at foregrounding, but I said that it's an umbrella term. Foregrounding or bringing something to the front is just a technique. Within that technique, there are two more features. If we study today the idea that foregrounding means bringing something in literary writing or poetry to the forefront, as if it's a highlight of a whole work. Observe the example that we looked at, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that becomes a highlight, that is foregrounding. Then we looked at the example of Donne's very celebrated compass as a conceit or a metaphor, extended metaphor or a conceit. Now these features are foregrounding, but how has that foregrounding been done? Has it been done by breaking a rule? Has it been done by sticking to a rule? That would be studied later, that it is either defamiliarization or repetition of a pattern, or automatization or parallelism, and the use of schemes and tropes. So this chart is telling you about the connections of these concepts. Of course, you may not be familiar with these concepts. So we today looked at just one of those concepts that we started with, foregrounding. So gradually you'll be acquainted with what is the connection of foregrounding with defamiliarization, automatization, how are they part of this umbrella term of foregrounding, and then how foregrounding is achieved with the help of which particular devices, and those devices would be schemes and tropes. So that is the chart that helps convey this idea that foregrounding is a broader term, and foregrounding can be achieved with the help of these 3 or 4 more concepts that are defamiliarization, automatization, deviation, parallelism. So all these concepts are what we used, or the writers used, to achieve defamiliarization, to achieve foregrounding. So we looked at the notions described by Jeffrey Leach and Makarowski, because they, as the theorists of formalism, have proposed the idea that literary writing on the basis of foregrounding is different from ordinary writing, and poetry makes use of foregrounding by making use of defamiliarization or automatization. So when the writers focus on making a writing striking, unusual, interesting, and worth notice for the reader, they do not really want to capture the accurate news or description. Their purpose is not to convey a feeling through the use of words which are uninteresting, boring, or regular. They want the reader to enjoy or have pleasure from the use of unusual, strange features which they have employed in their writing, which make the writing interesting, which evoke the surprise of the reader, and which convey a sensation. As we looked also today at the very fact that the formalists like John Makarowski and even Jeffrey Leach, they believe that in this aspect, poetry or literary art imitates the paintings or the art of expression in painting, where the painters also, or the artists also, want to convey the feeling or sensation of reality in art or in painting. Similarly, poets and literary writers also wants to convey the feeling and sensation of reality through the texts, through literature. So a poem is not written for the sake of telling us what happened, but what has been felt by a poet. And when it operates at the level of feeling and aesthetic pleasure, then that feeling is to be conveyed in a way that it prolongs the duration of understanding. So one problem with foregrounding is, or deviation is, that it may make it may make it difficult for the reader to understand what the writer means. But over there lies the very pleasure, because had the idea been conveyed very simply, there would have been no use of reading it in literature, because simple things are there even in newspapers or in the discussion that we have with each other. But art or literary writing and poetry are composed with the experience or a feeling that has to be conveyed as an aesthetic experience, that has to prolong the feeling of pleasure and make the reader empathize or feel connection with the work. And that connection can be prolonged if a writer foregrounds some features, if a writer defamiliarizes something that we know already, and makes us gain the pleasure and makes us explore what are the meanings of those features which are foregrounded, either as a deviation or either as something that is unfamiliar, strange, and new. So that is what we looked at today, and as this concept is the very core of the course, the concept of foregrounding, we will look at the related concepts that come after foregrounding or within foregrounding in the form of automatization and defamiliarization in the coming lectures, so that you understand what is the connection of foregrounding with defamiliarization and automatization. Thank you.